The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to The People's View. My name is David Schoneman and I'll be hosting this episode of the program. We're in the middle of the lockdown, or the isolation for the COVID-19, but things are still happening around the state. And although we're not in the studio, we're here once again in our living room. We're talking about what is going on. And right now there are some interesting developments that are going on with transparency and accountability here in the city of Nashua. On the program, we take a look at local, state, and national issues, but today we're going to take a specific look at getting updated on what's going on with Nashua and accountability, particularly as it respects the issues that have been unearthed with the local assessing department. I'm joined today, not in the studio, but at home via Skype by Laurie Ortalano. Laurie, welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Let's get an update on what's been happening with the overview and the things that you've uncovered about assessing. You started over a year ago now, I think, with some assessing issues that you uncovered as your tax rate went way up, or not your rate stayed the same, but as your property values went up and your tax bill was increased, you began looking at where are some of the inconsistencies between you and other folks in Nashua as regards home valuation. And you've been pursuing this for a long time. You've uncovered some behaviors on behalf of some of the assessors in the city that aren't quite up to what they should be. And you took this to Concord for a professional review from the state. And tell us how that went. That was a few weeks ago, I believe.
Right. So early on, well, about a year ago, actually, it was in beginning of March that I filed this PA 71 with the Department of Revenue, which was a formal complaint of misconduct against assessing officials. It's a formal complaint form that the state gives you, and it addresses some pretty serious charges regarding right to know or malfeasance or sales chasing, ethics violations. So I had put that in with the state, and then I had started thinking about what other avenues would be available for me as a citizen to reach out to a group that could maybe take some action. And I had thought about the New Hampshire Association of Assessing Officials. It's a statewide agency that all of the assessors belong to. And it was actually my husband who said, hey, a lot of these agencies have ethics standards. He belonged to a machinery dealership group. And they had standards that they operated by. And if you were part of the group and you weren't operating under the correct standards, you got tossed. So he said, you should look into this organization. So I did. I went online and I looked to see if they had any kind of complaint form. And they did. They had ethics violation forms you could put in, specifically addressing ethics. So I took my PA 71s and brought them over there and cited ethics violations out of their canons and their codes that they had written and put them in. And in September, I received a letter from them stating that they really weren't going to take any action. They were going to wait and see what the Department of Revenue did and what the city was doing, finding in their own personal investigation. And frankly, I was pretty disappointed with that letter because I felt the state groups I went to should operate as independent agencies. And they had their own set of standards that they reviewed, and I wanted to make certain that, I was being, my complaint was being handled independently. So I then learned in the end of January from the Department of Revenue that they, in fact, do not release the findings of their PA 71. They don't make them public, which was very concerning to me, and has opened up another whole area of discussion. But I said to them, well, what the heck why is the NHAAO waiting for your determination when your determination's never going to be public? And they said, yeah, you're right. We're going to contact them and say, you really got to act on your own. So I kind of threw my hands up a little bit, disgusted with how the whole process works. And this whole adventure of mine was to follow a process that a citizen could follow to try and address a serious problem in a department. These were all, citizen-based efforts that you could make. So about, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I got a letter in the mail from them, and they had ruled on the ethics issues, and they found that the then chief, John Duhamel, had violated canon codes that involved right-to-know information by not providing documents that I should have been provided to assist with my assessment. And also, the bigger one I thought that was huge too was not providing adequate supervision for the KRT contract. The oversight wasn't provided, and the sales data that was used to generate the model for this whole reevaluation was never handled correctly. The data check was never done by KRT because the chief allowed them to opt out of that part of the contract. And it appeared that our assessors and KRT did not verify sales data that was used to create the model. So the NHAAO hit him on those two charges, which were great. And then they also filed a charge against Greg Turgis, an ethics violation for overseeing his brother's work and presenting himself as with a conflict of interest for coming to our house to do a second review of the property when the property in question and the data and the assessment on the property had been done by his brother. They felt that presented the appearance of impropriety, and that should not have happened, which I did address with the city and felt that we did not get a fair shake by sending the brother in, and the city would not correct that. They just did not correct it. And, it's interesting because the brother, when he came in, was very nice to us in the house, listened to our concerns. We asked a number of questions. He left promising to get back to us in a week, and he walked out the door and we never heard from him again. And I probably tried for almost a month actually seeing him in City Hall and sending emails. When are you going to respond to our questions? When will we be hearing from you? He actually wrote to me a couple times and said, I'll get back to you soon. I'm talking to John Duhamel. I'll let you know. And then what happened is the time expired. The time expired to address our property and change the value was over by the end of October because they freeze the assessments and start printing tax bills for December. So they were deliberately running me up to expire the clock without answering questions to force me into a formal abatement with the city. So
that's terrible. I cannot believe it that they would do that. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised at this point. We've been talking about this for a long time. The entire past year, we've touched base on this numerous times. You've been on the show numerous times. And so they were running out the clock. That's a very interesting way to put it, like it's a game for them or something.
Yes.
They're running out the clock. It's really bullying is what it comes down to. You're a citizen. You have rights to this kind of information. This is your property. You're being taxed on it. You have a right to know how your property is being valued. And for them to be doing those kinds of things and then not getting back to you is unconscionable. So did the city take responsibility for this bad supervision, or are they laying it on someone else's feet? What's happening with the supervision?
Well, it's funny because my right to know lawsuit that got filed by my attorney, Rick Lehman, actually had a hearing today. And in that lawsuit, one of the very first stipulations of the suit was that there were that Mrs. Ortalano started digging into the assessing office and found that there were gross errors in how assessments were being handled. And the city's response to that first line was they agreed. So that was kind of shocking that the opening line was, yep, there were some gross problems here. Now, as they go on and address the suit, they disagreed with almost the rest of it. But they did address the fact that there were these gross problems. Just acknowledging that the gross problems existed is fine, but have they taken any corrective action to address them, in my opinion, not as directly as they need to? because the problem is twofold. You have a people problem and you have a process problem. And you can address process or type up generate all the manuals you need, put all the specs in place on what's supposed to happen. But if you don't have well-trained people who execute those procedures, the situation isn't cleaned up. And unfortunately, my feeling is we don't have a very well-developed assessing staff down there because, frankly, there was a lot of getting away with doing whatever the heck I wanted to do for years, and your professional development is completely tanked when that's how you lead your career. You missed out on 20 years of opportunity to develop yourself. And now we're asking you to step it up and be more conscientious about your work. And it's almost like you're starting the clock now. And that part has not been recognized because all you hear the city say is how wonderfully trained and highly skilled our people are. Well, right. I don't think that's really what we have here. And we're spending an awful lot of money.
We are. And I think that some of the folks who are giving you that opinion aren't qualified maybe for the jobs they're in either. I think really there's an attitude here. It seems to me, it's very clear that it's just go away, forget about it, because those folks who are giving those answers don't know how to fix it either. No one is there fixing it. And there seems to be a culture of, for lack of a better word, ineptitude with city management regarding financial concerns of the taxpayers, and certainly right to know as well. They seem to be ignoring issues, stifling dissent, and hoping that you're just going to get fed up and go away. And so they have not made it easy for you. Hence, you're in court and you're going to Concord and you're filing these forms and you're talking to the professional agencies. And these problems aren't getting resolved. They're not getting resolved within the assessing department, like you say, process and people. And they're not being resolved with any oversight of that department because those who are tasked now with oversight over the assessing department don't have the skill set either.
That's right. And so they're working on hiring this chief. And I've heard that they had 2 applicants apply. I think Ms. Kleiner said in a meeting that they are going to interview them once we're out of COVID. But I don't know why you can do a phone interview. That's a little bit, I mean, everyone's interviewing over the phone. So I don't know how that process is working to actually get a chief in, but that's been a huge issue. If you don't have anyone down there who's a skilled manager and the office is running without that leadership position, you can't tell me that Ms. Kleiner is serving in the position as manager of assessing when she wears 5 other hats for other departments and isn't even located in that office. That's just not the case. So, that's a little bit concerning. And it's not an easy fix either.
No, it's not easy. And I think you need to have people who are able to hire people that know more than they do. And I think that there's some fear with bringing in people that know too much because they know they're going to uncover more and they're not going to be able to control them either. Because a lot of what seems to be happening here has to do with controlling information, controlling access, control, and putting out fires, trying to keep everything contained. And as soon as you get someone in who's a competent manager, that containment is going to go away because a person who's competent is going to be looking out for their own career as well and their own reputation.
Yes.
And once they have that motivation, they're not going to be quite so inclined to protect the city. Because really, I think what City Hall wants is someone who's going to effectively protect the city from further fallout from this disaster. It's a disaster. And my guess is that this is really just the tip of the iceberg. If there's this kind of management going on in that department, I can only imagine what goes on in other departments.
Absolutely. I think the right to know issue, and I've discovered it looking in other city areas, is a problem. And I've started exploring some of that. My right to know case today, I had a brief hearing on it to sort of set the status of how it was going to proceed. And the right to know case is being heard by Judge Temple, and it was a teleconference call today for 30 minutes. And it was really interesting because the city took the position, Steve Bolton, that it's really not a right to know hearing, it's a civil lawsuit because of the type of allegations that are brought up. And he needs a 2-day trial with witnesses coming in order to address the freedom of information issues, which my lawyer Rick was very surprised at, because he's handled a lot of right to know lawsuits and he's never seen one handled this way. Judge Temple was aware of the time sensitivity and the priority given to right to know suits. And Steve wanted it to be drawn out for a year, when ordinarily a right to know suit would be heard within a couple of months. So abiding or considering the sensitivity and the priority of right to know, Judge Temple said, I'd like to see this in court in 6 months. And he wanted the two attorneys to meet to try and work the status of how that was going to proceed. And, my opinion is, and I think my attorney will certainly handle this with Attorney Bolton, is we're going to bring this back to a right to know suit. If they feel there's too much extraneous stuff in there, let's just go after the information we think we deserve. I filed a right to know lawsuit. I didn't file a civil lawsuit against the city. That's a separate issue. And I really want my information addressed on the merits of the information I'm requesting. And this is where cities have deep pockets. They have they have endless pots of money to spend because they've got taxpayer dollars. So, Bolton will sit in City Hall and say, I don't care if I spend $100,000. I got the money in the tax base. I'll go and make a trial out of this. I'll call in 15 people. I'll deposition everyone. I'll turn this into, whatever I want to. And I don't care. It doesn't come out of my pocket. And that's always the trouble with trying to address a problem with City Hall or tackle something like this.
Yeah, you can't fight City Hall, right? The old adage. My grandparents told me that 50 years ago.
Yes.
You can't fight City Hall. It's a very hard battle. And here you are trying to fight City Hall. Really, you started out in the beginning, just a few minutes ago, you said that you wanted to follow a process, to prove the process, show people how it's done, to follow a process that you as a taxpayer are allowed. It's in the statutes. You're allowed to follow this process. This information is to be available. We're self-governed, so the government information that's available should be available to you too. And it all has blown up because there's nothing but stalling, whether it's the assessor who says, I'll get back to you in a week, and he stalls until the abatement period is done, or whether it's an attorney who says, here we have a case that's supposed to be heard in a couple of months. Let's drag it out for a year and see what she does. Let's go with a year.
Yeah.
Right. They really want you to just
maybe
go,
that'll make her run away or give up or walk away. Right to knows can be addressed by pro se per any individual who wants to go to court and represent their right to know. I used an attorney because I felt like it was a little more complex, and I actually wanted to bundle my 5 requests into one because I thought it was more expedient for the court's time. But I don't have a problem going in one at a time with each one on my own. I'm more than happy to do that if that's what it takes. And I know from a court time standpoint, it would be a lot less time than spending 16 or 20 hours in court in a trial. For both the court and I know the city doesn't care because, like I said, they spend endless money. But they're spending my money, and I care, and they're spending everyone else's. So
everyone who's watching should care about this. Now, if this goes back, if you go back the 5 or 6 times, is it going to be the same judge each time?
I don't know. I'm not certain how it would get assigned each time you go back in. I'm actually not positive how those assignments get done.
There have been a number of high-profile cases that the city of Nashua has been involved in that went to the district court. I'm thinking about the Fred T. Boom and Dan Moriarty's suit regarding the spending cap. There have been others, too, that have gone to Judge Temple. And Judge Temple seems to, and I don't know the man, and I'm not casting any aspersions, but he seems to act or decide very favorably to the city's position on a historical basis. That seems to be the side that he has taken. Are you worried about that? Are we hopeful for a different judge? You were supposed to have a different judge today, and at the last minute, it became Judge Temple. It sounded like
It did. We originally had Will Delker, I think, and then it got changed. And am I worried about that? Sure, I'm always worried if the city always ends up on the favorable side. Obviously, I mean, I think there's a lot of merits to this right to know these issues, and I think that I'm obviously disappointed today that the judge viewed it as a civil, lawsuit, and that required a trial, and not on the merits of the data of the request for information. I mean, I did hire a lawyer to handle a right to know lawsuit. I now have a civil trial in a whole different. A civil trial that I can't seek any kind of damages for because it is based on right to know. And that's not the direction I wanted, so I have to rethink that direction. And I kind of know exactly where I want to go with this, and hopefully get a fair shake on information. Some of the early right to knows I did not give my attorney to put into the suit because I put those up with the state in the PA 71, and they were very compelling. Absences, failure to give me data. I didn't put them in the suit with Rick Lehman because I thought the DRA would be releasing the information publicly. And then I learned after our suit was done that the DRA isn't going to release it. So I was really upset because I said we should have included this. These were strong cases of information not provided. Now, what has pleased me is that the NHAAO has come out with right to know recognized as an ethics violation against John Duhamel because of this information I requested early on. So I feel like it gives me a little bit of credibility that they found this as well. But I'd like to go back now and put these in my suit to have a judge rule on them, because I won't hear from the DRA, and the New Hampshire Association of Assessing Officials is not a legal body. They're just a group of lay people that go off of ethics guidelines and make a determination. So,
well, let's see what happens with this. I think it's interesting. I mentioned earlier that I think that my grandparents told me all those years ago, you can't fight City Hall. Something else that they said a long time ago was honesty is the best policy. And frankly, I think this would have been so much easier, so much better handled had the city simply been honest in the beginning and not tried to hide and to protect itself from what they thought was exposure. There's also, besides honesty being the best policy, there's what a tangled web we weave. Once we practice, and there's been a lot of deception, a lot of disinformation, a lot of stalling going on here, and it gets worse and worse and worse. Now we're almost out of time. When you and I spoke on the phone earlier today, you mentioned something that you post online. It's kind of a page that you have where you tell stories.
Yes.
Like, can you believe this kind of a story, right?
Right.
And you told me a story that I think we can finish up with here in the last couple of minutes that some of the folks at home might be interested in hearing, because they hear all this stuff about the forms and the DRA and they think, well, what's really happening? Well, this is an interesting story because it sheds light on the kinds of things that are really going on with the assessing department. Can you tell us that story briefly?
Sure. So I have this blog post now called Good Gov. And I set up a Facebook page, which I don't necessarily supervise. It's just an open page. And Good Gov is just a blog posting. And I've probably put up maybe, 15 postings so far. And I started looking at what I described unusual inconsistencies in the assessing office. And I sat down one day months ago before COVID, and I started hammering out the cases that really stuck out in my mind as red flags. And I said, these will all make great posts. And the first one I found was a house, 7 Southgate, Nashua, that was built in 2017 that our assessor went to and never put the property on the record card and never taxed the home. So it paid no taxes. It was getting an $8,000 pass on its tax bill. It was paying only for the land and not for the beautiful new ranch that was put up. And I posted that as one of my blog posts. How does this happen? How does an assessor go close a permit, say he's inspected the house, never put the drawing on the card, and never taxed the property. That's ridiculous. So actually, the city was appalled by that, I think. You know, when it goes up on a blog post, now they never treat me with any respect to acknowledge me when I try to point out stuff. I pointed out errors on some properties that were pretty glaring early on, and they just poo-pooed me. Send me away. We're not interested in you. We're not going to change anything. You're not an assessor. So I use the postings now, and the postings are very effective for them to go, oh, wait a minute. Okay, we've missed $16,000 of taxes here. Well, on that one, they put in a supplemental bill, and they billed the guy for last year. He got a free year, and now the house is being taxed. Well, another issue that really bothered me was an assessor bought a house in Nashua that was sold by his girlfriend's family, his partner's family. And just prior to buying the house, he went in. It was a family sale, so it's not listed in the MLS listings. He went in and did the inspection of the home to mark up the property card, reduce the assessment a little bit. First of all, any assessor buying their own home or buying a home should not be assessing their own property. That's a clear ethics violation. Then, as soon as they bought the property, they pulled a permit for $80,000 to do a renovation. The renovation is complete. An entry-level data collector from the city of Nashua goes out and marks the card. The card is, they missed the kitchen. They never changed the depreciation for all the new renovations. The house, in my opinion, ends up being very undertaxed. And this same assessor is the one who came to our house when we bought it, looked at the pictures on how nicely renovated it was, changed the depreciation by 20%, and just on that factor alone raised my assessment over $100,000. So
it's unbelievable.
This assessor doesn't do it to his own property, but he did it to mine, and he's done it to a lot of others.
Yes, well,
And
I think for him to do the inspection on a property he's buying and then to degrade the value so that he pays less taxes. This is the kind of thing that's happening, and this is the kind of thing that folks at home should be very concerned about. Laurie, we're out of time here. I want to thank you very much for pursuing this. This has been great because you're really acting on behalf of every taxpayer in the city of Nashua, and we thank you very much for that. So, folks, I want to thank you, too, for watching. We'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.